You are listening to Abnormal Spaces.
I'm Donnie.
I'm Ryan.
In this podcast, we discuss conceptual realities, the researchers, authors, and explorers who describe and define them, as well as our personal experiences in these abnormal spaces. In this episode, we discuss the lost cities of Tartaria, the evidence believers point to as proof, and the notions of hidden or forbidden knowledge. Are we being misled? And if so, by whom? The other one we use is pork chop. So like when I'm describing a beat to somebody, the pork is the kick drum and the chop is the snare.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah, so I'll be like, chop, chop, pork, or whatever.
Ours is doom-ka.
Ooh, doom-ka.
Doom-ka, doom-ka.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different ones. It just depends on the day.
Yeah. I fall back on pork chop a lot.
Pork chop.
Chris did... He's like, do you want me to do a Pat Boone, Debbie Boone? And I'm like, what is a Pat Boone, Debbie Boone? And essentially, it's just what it sounds like, but it's like snare kick, tom-tom kick. So it's Pat Boone, Debbie Boone.
Oh, that's pretty good. It's just a lot to think of.
Right, I know. Well, and he threw it out like I should know, like it's a term. He's like, you want me to do a Pat Boone, Debbie Boone there? And I'm like, I don't think so. Pork chop is pretty easy, and boots and cats is pretty easy, or boots and pants.
Boots and pants, 4 on the floor.
You know, the whole Tartarian Empire theory, it's got so many of the things that we love. It's got some sacred geometry, it's got some ley lines, it's got lost civilization. I mean, it's got all the ingredients for the kind of abnormal cake we like to have here, but when I tried to bake it, it was a flop. No,
You forgot the leavening agent.
I must have. But, you know, one of the things that started this theory was a declassified document. And so I went to the CIA.gov reading room and went to try to find this, and I found a whole bunch of other stuff. And one of the things that I found, and I was on a long deep dive on this, was a congressional record from 1961. It was lengthy. I did not read all of it because a lot of it was kind of grandstanding speeches by various senators of the time, one of which was named Mr. Flood, which I think is interesting.
I like that name.
Yeah. But at any rate, most of this particular hearing was about communists taking over the world and what it means to be an American. They were like, you know, if you don't support hard work for an honest day's pay, etc., you might be a communist. If you're lazy and flabby, it actually said that. I swear to you, it said if you're flabby and lazy, you know, you might be a communist.
Flabby.
So, right, yeah. It was really preposterous, really. The whole thing was pretty ridiculous. And obviously it was propaganda, and it was meant to get everyone riled up and anti-communist. One of the things that was just briefly mentioned was the communists trying to erase the history of the Tartars and Tartary in general. What's very interesting about that is at the same time, the USSR was really trying to promote national identity, the mother country, and feeling pride in being a Russian. So one of the things that they were trying to do was actually trying to remind people of their ancestry and their history. And the communists weren't necessarily trying to downplay that to the degree that the American propagandists wanted America to believe it. What it seemed more like was you had some opposing ideologies in the USSR at the time, partially funded by us. But one of those ideologies was more of a socialist party and socialist ideas, which are not really compatible with communism. They are, they aren't, etc. One's an economic philosophy, one's a government philosophy. But regardless, there was a Tartarian socialist revolutionary party at the time. That group was really playing into this national identity of Russia and their history. And so the Communist Party was not so much trying to erase that as much as they were trying to say, here's a better thing. We've evolved. We're smarter now. This is the best way to run a country and best way to handle finances and employment, etc. But because that document was declassified and then other documents were declassified, somehow this kind of grew legs on social media. Then people started looking into it and they're like, hey, wait a minute, this was forgotten or erased or whatever. I'm not so sure that it was. Part of that is because there wasn't a lot necessarily to erase. The cartographers of the 17 and 1800s that were drawing the maps, it was cold, it was barren, they weren't that interested in it. One of the reasons it was given that name was in reference to Tartarus, which was like a hellscape, basically.
Yeah.
Not more interesting, but of note. There are these depictions of Genghis Khan, a Mongol. There's a version of the story of Genghis Khan in which he had red hair and blue eyes, or possibly green eyes. The reason I find that kind of interesting is because research into human DNA has revealed that white Europeans weren't always white. And in fact, it wasn't until about 3,000 years ago that they started gradually turning white. I say that even though this time period isn't that long ago, but I think it's interesting whenever people talk about three different Tartarians. There was a white, a black, and I can't remember the other one. And that Genghis Khan was a black Tartarian, even though he had a very Eurasian countenance. The other thing about that is we have these various depictions, but obviously there weren't photographs, so, we don't know. But at any rate, the theory for our listeners that don't know much about it is that there was once a empire around Siberia, Russia, that had expanded across the globe. And people believe that some of the structures that we have in the West and that are essentially on every continent were built by the Tartarians and then repurposed by later civilizations. Of course, there is the whole nefarious plot to erase them, and that's why the buildings were repurposed. And the majority of that is pretty easily dismissed, or at least to me it is. But that's the theory, that there was this great empire that had outposts all over the earth and had advanced technology as far as wireless electricity and
levitating stuff.
All kinds of magical stuff we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, again, it had all the ingredients.
Yeah. I was watching videos and reading and trying to figure out all this shit. And I just turned this shit off at a point because, like, a couple of these guys, they're going so hard on it that I didn't even have any idea what they were talking about.
Yeah.
They're like, this sounds like this, and this civilization sounds like Mu, and then Muah, and then like all these weird conclusions from everywhere, like putting all these pieces together and all this stuff. And I really kind of hate that stuff.
Yeah.
Like in general.
Me too.
Which is why this is a really weird episode, because I said something to you about it at some point, and then like, have you heard of Tartaria or whatever? And you're like, what? and that's when I was like, oh wow, so Donnie hasn't heard of it, so I don't know, like, because usually we both have heard of what we're kind of like into, talking about. And I wasn't even into it. I just kind of like happened to buy some shit, maybe on TikTok or something dumb. What interested me about this whole thing is, one, kind of the Atlantean sort of deal.
Yep.
And lost civilization, like how there was a cataclysm, all the story.
All the story, yeah.
Right. And then the other is the buildings and the architecture of the 19th century and maybe before, I don't know, they're saying, but whatever. And the reason that it interests me is because of the architecture of the buildings themselves.
Yeah.
And some of the other, like the churches and the, just like these things that people are like, no, this was built with a lot of intention towards etheric gathering or, things like that. Part of me doesn't doubt that, because if you look at the spires and and then if you go back to electroculture and you look at how those early things were built, they're really similar.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. So I think there's something to it. They use a lot of copper, a lot of sacred geometry. It's all there.
Right.
And so I think that is the part about this whole story that really interested me the most.
Me too. And that's why I wanted to dive into it. And I was really hoping, something was there. I'm with you in that the architecture in particular has the hallmarks of a lot of the things we've talked about. And I don't, for a second, think that it wasn't intentional and that they weren't trying to harness the telluric current or something. I think that they were really working with nature, and trying to harness all of that. It's all the conspiracy around it that is a little foolish, I think.
We were watching Stephen Greer, the UFO guy. Mm-hmm. He did like a series of conferences back, I don't know, maybe about around 2014 or 2015. Mind-blowing shit. I mean, I'm talking about white papers, CIA, like all the stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to follow a little bit for me because my brain just kind of shuts off at times, but it is insane.
Yeah. Yeah, I find myself kind of fixating on things whenever, like, for example, many of the videos about the buildings in favor of there being this reset and this replacement of the Tartarian architecture and buildings, many of the videos, someone will say something like, and they just couldn't have built it like that. And I'm like, okay, but we have, Roman aqueducts that are still functional. We have all kinds of representations of just, using hammer and chisel and marble, and you have, Venus de Milo or whatever. Mm-hmm. So they're saying, oh, and there's no way. And then they move on to the next point.
Right.
And I'm like, but yeah, that could have been done.
Yeah.
And was probably done.
Yeah. I mean, if it was documented how long it took to do it,
right.
That's the only thing you really need, because, I guess the conspiracy is, it didn't take long.
Yeah.
These buildings didn't take a long time. They built some of them for the World's Fair, and then they took them down.
Yeah, they burned them down.
Yeah. I could get with the part of the conspiracy where, like in the 1800s, the gloves were off.
Right.
Everybody was just experimenting in every way, and all the insane stuff happened then.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy.
I know.
Because they didn't, they had like leather and straw.
Right, I know. I know.
And then Tesla came around and he just upended everything, and he's just like, oh no, yeah, it's this way. But things before Tesla pointed that way as well.
Right.
But he was the one that really just captured it, and he was like, no, this is it.
Yeah.
And he changed our entire world. Well, going back to this Stephen Greer thing, what was interesting is how he was talking about technology. And he was talking about how before 1945 or 1946, we had made strides that are unheard of, even by today's standards.
Yeah.
Like we can't reproduce them, or maybe we can, but I don't know.
Right.
And he even said on there, he's like, I don't give a shit about conspiracy theories. He was like 98 point whatever percent of them are false,
Right.
like pretty much.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting to me because he said by 1956, I believe, the deep state, the deep government, whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of different names for it,
Yeah.
had perfected anti-gravity. Because the Nazis had almost perfected anti-gravity
Wow.
for Hitler.
Yeah.
And then, whenever all the Nazi stuff went down, then America took the brightest, the most genius guys who worked on that and brought them here to finish it.
Yeah.
It kind of draws a comparison to like Tartaria because of the way that they used to build buildings to work with the natural currents and ether.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that to oppress a civilization or a species, that you would be like at a point, oh, wait, no, we can't do that because this causes higher vibratory levels
Yeah.
in human beings. So we can't have those buildings anymore.
Right.
And that's sort of conspiratorial too, but, I just feel like there's some truth in that.
Yeah. Well, again, like you said, I mean, there's lots of documented evidence that supports that. And of course, then you have to ask the question, well, we were making great strides. What happened?
Yeah.
And that's where the conspiracy comes in, because in the absence of some solid answers and some decent reasoning, people have to fill in the blanks themselves, and they always come back to they're trying to hold us down. And for good reason, throughout history, people at the top have held everyone down.
Yeah.
So I think that's, it's pretty natural to go, well, what would be the obvious answer based on other historical events? Oh, it's them trying to hold us down.
And when you have no morals, and there are people, a lot of people in this world who have no morals.
Right.
Like the darkest hearts that exist.
Yeah. Win at all costs.
Yeah.
Yep.
And me and Sabin sometimes talk about it, and she's like, well, why would you just want to be just evil?
Right.
For evil's sake.
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that because I can't imagine it.
Right.
It's like money is power, but once you reach a level of money where money doesn't matter anymore to you,
Right.
then you start getting weird. I think if you are of a certain evilness,
Right. Yeah.
and you're like, well, what if we can do this? And that goes back to Atlantis.
Yeah. They
Had reached a pinnacle, and then they just got bored.
Right.
And they had no morals.
Right.
The scientists. So it just repeats and plays out. And so that's why it makes sense to me. I'm like, oh, well, it's not about money anymore.
Right.
Yeah, it's just about, well, can we do this?
Right. Yeah.
What happens if we do that?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And can I make sure no one else has it as good as me?
Right.
Yeah. That's a big part of it too. One of the things that I thought was funny in one of the things I read or videos I watched or whatever, they wanted to claim Tesla as their own. And they're like, oh, he's of Tartarian descent, of course.
Yeah.
And I'm just
Well,
like...
he was Serbian, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, geographically, okay, depending on where it was. But I thought that was funny, and then they would show photographs of buildings being constructed at the World Fair. And these people would say, well, that's actually them taking it down. And I'm like, no one takes pictures of the demolition typically. They take pictures of the construction.
Yeah.
Interestingly, too, World's Fair and Tesla, the Chicago World's Fair, the 1893, one of the things that really set that one apart was using alternating current, which was Tesla was very much a proponent of alternating current, whereas Edison was more a direct current person. But anyway, so the way they were able to light all that up was with alternating current. So it was kind of a proof of concept for Tesla. So I thought that little factoid was neat,
Yeah.
and interesting. But the idea that there is a person or a group of people who endeavor tirelessly to control the world seems like comic book nonsense. But we're living in a time now where we can actually see that in real time.
Yeah, it's all, I mean, I hate to be that person. It's coming to light. Shit is coming to light. It really is. We're watching it. What's cool is we don't know, we don't have a reference point for this.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's never, I mean, in our history and our knowledge, it hasn't been done.
Right. And
Yeah.
it's funny because in our lifetimes, certainly not, but even in the history of the United States, nothing quite to this
That's
level.
what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the prevailing theory is that there's a plan. And then so some people were like, well, the plan is to do this or the plan is to do that. And I'm like, I hope there's a plan because it doesn't look like a plan right now. But regardless,
I'm split, like right down the middle. I'm like, yeah, we've been under a spell for a very long time. I mean, you can just look at it and
Yeah.
see that.
yeah.
So many years of just everything being the same and all these promises and nothing ever happening. And I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
and it just keeps getting more and more vague and more and bigger and more spread out until you get here.
Yeah.
And then everybody's like, wait a minute, I can't get a job, first of all. Second of all, if I get a job, I can't even work enough to make my way.
Yeah. To afford anything.
Like that means it's really broken.
Right. So I'm going through all of these declassified documents, and mostly it was just, spying on Russians. But I was going through all these documents looking for just any mention of Tartaria, Tartarians, Tartary, anything along those lines. And one thing that I came across that was, I wish that one, I could find out more about it, and two, I wish that I could read and understand Russian. The thing that I came across that was really fascinating was all of this talk about geological components of the area, specifically quartz crystals and their ability to hold energy. And apparently there's a region where the ore content is high and the quartz content is really high, and this particular quartz seems to have more energy or something like that. I'm guessing because, again, I can't translate Russian, and also these are some of these look like they've been Xeroxed 100 times over, and they're very hard to read. And they're just dense. There's a lot of specific knowledge, like geological terminology that I don't fully understand or don't understand well enough to really, make a coherent argument about it one way or the other. But it appeared that there was some natural resource type interest in this particular region. And I thought the quartz crystals were particularly interesting just because, again, of the Tesla thing and of utilizing those buildings. I saw this one diagram that was showing how the spires conducted electricity throughout the town or whatever. And everything that Tesla said and did to that end proves that that's possible.
Yeah.
And so I have no reason to doubt that. But then imagine it sitting on a natural quartz, like that. That is more interesting than some, mud flood or anything else. Like, I think that's the thing to focus on.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, God, there's so many things that are in plain sight almost. And it's like, almost like I don't know the answer as to why we don't know. I mean,
it's a sleight of hand thing. It's the whole distraction, the whole magician thing where, what's going on, you're going to look over here at this other thing. And that's what it really feels like. And again, this seems to have started with the Communist Party trying to undermine and usurp any of the other challenging parties in Russia, and then the United States grabbing a hold of that and kind of running with it. And, and you have two different propaganda arms from two different countries working at the same time, talking about one thing in particular. Of course, that's going to stir up a lot of these conspiracy theories and a lot of the just interest in it in general. We've got both of these just megalithic countries with, huge budgets for propaganda, disseminating this information. Yeah, it's going to stir up some interest.
Yeah, that's how conspiracies work, unfortunately. I mean, my interest lies, in the fantastical ideas of construction and architecture and materials and how they interface with what we call the world or Earth.
Yeah.
You look at the buildings, there's a lot of copper, a lot of brass, there's a lot of sacred geometry. And, you were talking about those buildings being on top of quartz. And then in Russia, they also have this mineral, I believe. I think it's a mineral. I don't know. But it's called shungite. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
It's like it's a pure black sort of crystal and stone, or it's almost looks like metallic and black. There's different grades of it, I guess. It's actually really pretty wild. There's a lot of claims. It holds like a really super high vibration. I mean, like one of the highest.
Oh, okay.
And then there's another one called moldavite, I believe. And
I've heard of that.
And it's so rare, But like shungite is definitely one that's super interesting to me. And I don't really get into a lot of that stuff. But apparently if you take, it's called like elite shungite, I believe. It's like 99% purity or something. You can only get it from Russia too.
Oh, wow.
There's a lot of people selling knockoffs, of course.
Of course.
You put it in water, it will actually structure the water and clean it.
Oh.
In the water.
Okay.
So that is something I haven't done yet because I just haven't done it.
Yeah.
And I don't even know what that looks like cleaning the water.
Right, yeah.
But it's a thing, and I plan on getting me a piece of that shungite, but it's expensive for a real one.
We're going to need a lab.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking about that the other day. I'm like, well, I guess I need to sell a lot of this musical equipment and just start buying some laboratory equipment and somebody to teach us how to run it.
Oh, right. Yeah, for Act 2 of our lives. Goodbye, music. Hello, microscope.
No. Who was I talking to? Maybe I was talking to my mom. Yeah, I was talking to my mom and the other day, and she, we was talking about the podcast. I don't know if I'll leave this in or not. I was like, yeah, I think we're running out of stuff to talk about already. And she just laughed, and she's like, well, I mean, you don't have to keep talking about something new every time because, I mean, you probably will run out of shit to talk about. And I was like, well, I don't know about interviewing people, because I was like, I'm just not that quick, Mom. my brain just doesn't work that quick, and I mean, that, but she doesn't really know that, but that. Donnie knows that. Sometimes it'll take me 10 minutes to say a sentence. But then I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, you know what? I would really love to talk to people, certain people, and learn more about it, even if, my written questions are kind of lame or whatever. But they wouldn't be lame, I don't think, because the questions that I have are always really weird.
Right, yeah.
But it wouldn't be that great, like for as far as like an interview or anything. I would just be like, well, I've listened to all this stuff, but I want to know about this little tiny piece of this little kernel,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that could either be good or bad. And I was thinking, and then Donnie, he's just good with being on top in words and like just going. So I don't know.
Some days I feel like that.
Yeah, but I feel like you're a lot more professional than, I mean, you sound more, I don't know, like you got it together, man. I do not have it together, and I'm okay with that, like at this point in time.
Yeah. I take that as a compliment, so thank you. It feels weird, but I like having conversations with people.
And there's that.
Yeah.
So
I love talking to people.
So everybody just put that on your back burner. That it's a possibility.
It is.
It may not happen, and it probably won't. But one of these days.
One of these days. Yeah, I like the idea of talking to people that know more about this stuff, or people who, because that's the thing. If someone has spent a portion of their life really studying something, one, they're going to have all kinds of insight that you're not going to have. Two, they're going to have all kinds of little factoids, sometimes about stuff that's just on the periphery of what they were, researching or whatever. But they're also going to have read or conversed with or studied the work of other like-minded researchers. And so, it's you're not getting just one person's interpretation of data. You're getting all of the shoulders that they're standing on.
Yeah, and they're like super precise about it because
Right.
that's their whole life and
Yes.
career, you
Yeah.
know? So they're going to speak about it in ways that I could never, I'm like, yellow's yellow and red's red. And that's how I see it,
Right.
But they're like, well, let me tell you.
Right, yeah.
And I would love to talk to somebody about Kazirev mirrors and that technology, like just go deep into it, like, all this stuff that we talk about.
Yeah.
Because it's fascinating to me,
Yeah, me too.
and I would just love to know more about
Yeah.
it.
Well, and one thing, and this kind of happened for me, later in life, but I love finding out where my blind spots are, or like where I've got something wrong. Like if I think of a thing a certain way, or in my mind the definition of a thing is whatever it is, and then someone who knows a whole lot more about me goes, well, actually it's more like this.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I do too.
That feels good. In my 20s and 30s, no, I wanted to argue.
Right.
But I'm definitely at a point now where I want to know. I want to hear it.
Yeah. And then sometimes, out of my insane brain, like something will come out of the mouth that maybe somebody else would be like, well, I don't know. That's weird. Because I've had that shit happen before,
Yeah.
And it's rare.
Yeah.
But
Sometimes stuff will come out of my mouth, and I'll be like, well, who just said that?
yeah, I do that all the time.
And then I'm like, why? I need to research what I just said. And then it's a whole new point of interest for me or whatever.
Yeah, you just that just shows you that you're not you.
Right. Yeah.
It's just a random thought, and then you're like, oh wow,
Yeah.
who said that?
Right.
Yeah. So there is that guy, the microprocessor guy, that I can't ever remember his name. Sorry, as of this moment, but he's the guy that's like the quantum computing guy who's like, no, man, consciousness is first.
Yeah.
It's first.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what anybody says. you can't say it without consciousness.
Right.
So it's first.
Yep.
And so that's amazing to me. I want to talk to that guy too.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to talk to the team that discovered that there are microtubules that facilitate consciousness. And the idea is that those microtubules may, in fact, be conscious themselves. And it goes down this really long path to get to literally everything has consciousness. Part of it started with this study of this asteroid. It's just mind-blowing to me that we could send a probe to an asteroid, grab a sample, bring it back, and check it out. But in this sample, they were able to find, 16 or 18 amino acids that are necessary for life on Earth, remnants of mineral deposit, which indicates that there was water within the asteroid, but also this whole structure with these microtubules. And they believe that in our brain, it's somewhat replicated. We think quantumly, whether we realize it or not. So in order for all of these connections to be made, so all those processes can happen, it is facilitated by these microtubules. And then going a step further, they're like, well, the whole universe these exist everywhere. We can't prove it yet, but we have plenty of reason to believe that these tubules are all throughout space and time and everything else. So, yeah, I want to talk to those people. Now, I'm going to sound like a moron talking to them because I don't know, but...
Well, yeah, and I think of that too, but like, I'm okay with playing the moron.
Oh, me too. Well, part of what I like about this is I know that I know a little more about some things than just the average person. And these people know a million times more than me. So if I can be a conduit to kind of translate it to the people that know a little less than me, then I'm doing something good, I feel like. I feel like I'm helping to bring that information and pass it along.
Yeah, I'm like, explain it to me. Like, like explain it to a dude like me.
Right.
Or a person that's just like, okay, here's A and B. Now tell me the rest. Like,
Right.
But tell it to me in a way that I can digest it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Leave your big words out.
Or you can use them, but immediately define them.
Yeah, immediately define your big words. We're just going to sit back,
Yeah.
like
We're going to enjoy the show.
we're going to ask some weird questions probably here and there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, I haven't found any proponent of the Tartarian theory that I felt like I wanted to have a long conversation with.
Yeah, me either.
Because most of them were just like, how can this be?
Yeah, and I just, now I'm like, well, damn it, why did I even say anything about this shit? Because when I first saw it, I was like, ooh.
Yeah.
Then when I started really looking into it, I was like, shit.
Exact same. And at one point, I almost texted you like, hey, should we come up with something else?
Yeah.
But, I'm really glad, though, because a couple of things. One, it did on its surface have the hallmarks of everything that we would be interested in. But two, we talk about some things that are somewhat controversial. We talk about some things that I think a lot of people would just as soon dismiss or not think of again. And so, I think it helps to have a topic that we can both go, you know what, this seems kind of silly.
You know what? Fuck that. Fuck that dumb shit.
I'm going to leave an angry comment on every video.